Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tony Perkins. I'm president of FRC Action, which was the host of the straw poll. I welcome you to the 2015 Values Voter Summit. Thanks for being here. We've announced the results. We've passed out to you all of the data from the straw poll. As you see, Ted Cruz coming in first. This is his third year for him to win the straw poll here at the Family Research Council, the FRC Action straw poll at the VVS. Dr. Ben Carson, second place, Mike Huckabee third, Marco Rubio fourth, Donald Trump in fifth place, followed by Rick Santorum, Carly Fiorina, Bobby Jindal, and Rand Paul. And you can see the rest of the numbers there. The issues, as I mentioned, number one, religious liberty. Number two, the issue of life. And three, the issue of protecting natural marriage. So I'll leave you to dissect the numbers from the straw polls. We've given you all the raw numbers, but I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have about the 2016 or 2015 VVS straw poll.
Talk about it. So Trump fifth place in this national polls. He's obviously top of them. What do you see? What's going on there? What's the relationship between those things?
It's the first time Donald Trump has been to the Values Voter Summit. He's new to the attendees of the Values Voter Summit. And, you know, first I have to give him credit for coming here and being a part of the Values Voter Summit. He was warmly received, a lot of buzz around his attendance here. And I think it's a part of beginning a conversation if he wants to build a relationship with evangelical, social conservative voters, I should say. They're more complicated and savvy than the media likes to give them credit to. They look intently at the candidates, where they stand on the issues, not only what they say, but where they have been and where they want to go. And so I think it's a part of Donald Trump building a relationship. But quite frankly, I think a fifth place showing for Donald Trump here is actually pretty good.
For those candidates that didn't break the top 10 or got less than 100 votes, what does that mean for them with social conservative voters? Do you think that these voters are ruling them out?
It's a very crowded field. This is a part of the process of people having to make difficult choices. You can only vote once, in terms of you can only vote for one presidential candidate and one vice presidential candidate. So you had to choose. And I can tell you personally, it's a difficult process of choosing because many of these candidates in this race are personal friends that I've worked with for a number of years. And it comes down, I think people are beginning to analyze, all right, who is putting together a credible campaign, who is right on the issues. In fact, most of these that came here this weekend are right on the issues. There may be some disagreement to some form, in some form or fashion. But then people are looking at who can win, who can go the distance, who is able to raise the money, who's putting together the ground games. And I think they're having to make those tough choices. And I think we're going to have to, at some point in time, and not every candidate likes to consider this, but at some point in time, we're going to have to see candidates making decisions like Rick Perry made, like Scott Walker made, that the field's just too crowded, and this is not my time.
Jeb Bush, 7 votes, 1%. What does he need to do?
Well, it would help him if he would actually show up and talk to value voters. I think, look, he's been challenged from the very beginning with conservatives, and it certainly did not help him by not coming and being a part of the Values Voter Summit. And in fact, it just doesn't appear that he's having strong conversations with social conservative voters. And the problem with that is they make up about 50% of primary voters. And you cannot win a primary and succeed in a general election without having strength within the ranks of social conservative voters. We've seen that in the last 2 election cycles. Yes?
I think participants of this year's Values Voters Summit is more
Yes.
enthusiastic than previous years. Do you think serious situation of religious liberties promote sense of urgency among social conservatives?
That is a great question, a very good observation. This is our second largest attendance ever at our 10th annual Values Voter Summit. The only exception to this was 2011, and in that year, Ron Paul actually bust in about 700 people to participate in the straw poll. You know, that's fine. There's no prohibition against that. It's not something we necessarily encourage, but he did it. They were not participants in the entire conference. They came to hear his speech and they left. This year, we had just shy of 2,700 attendees registered for the event. And I do think that there's both an angst and an urgency that we have seen religious liberty being attacked in this country, and of course that was the #1 issue, and there are many issues, the national defense issues which were talked about here, the issue of Planned Parenthood, which was prominently featured throughout this weekend. But when it came to the #1 issue, there was consensus that it was the issue of religious liberty, and that's why I believe you see such energy and collection of values voters from around the country coming here to give voice to their values.
Big news yesterday was John Boehner stepping down. Is that considered a victory for social conservatives, and what does it mean, do you think, for the Republican Party in general?
Well, I think it is movement in the right direction. As we saw yesterday, that was the biggest applause line for the entire day when Marco Rubio announced that John Boehner was resigning as Speaker. It's not about John Boehner as an individual. I know John Boehner, I like John Boehner, but I do not approve of his leadership. And I think when conservative voters over the last 5 years have increasingly given support to Republicans to where they're now in the majority of Congress, having both the House and the Senate, and they have still failed to advance the conservative agenda that they have repeatedly campaigned on. Quite frankly, conservative voters are tired of them running to these political skirmishes waving a white flag. They don't expect them to win every time, but they do expect them to at least fight for the core values that they espouse when they run for office. And so I think that is good news that John Boehner is stepping aside. Now we turn our attention to finding a leader who will be willing to fight for these conservative values and principles. Who that is, not yet certain. There are some people making themselves available that I think could possibly help move the conservative agenda forward.
Would you be happy if it was Kevin McCarthy?
I've worked with Congressman McCarthy. He's a friend. I do believe he is more. His voting record is very conservative. He has shown himself to be concerned with the issues that we care about. I'm going to continue my conversations with Kevin over the next couple of weeks as this process comes to a head. I want to make sure he's going to fight. Now, I think he will, but I want to be sure if he is to be the next Speaker of the House that he'll be willing to fight for these values that we care about.
Do you think that CR will pass with funding for Planned Parenthood?
I'm very concerned that, and to put this, kind of the backstory here, is I was on Capitol Hill on Thursday talking with some members of the leadership team and others about the path that they were going to go forward on, and that was what the Speaker had charted out was a CR with a clean CR with funding for Planned Parenthood. I believe that's what precipitated his resignation, that there was this resolution pending to vacate the chair that Congressman Mark Meadows had introduced. And if the conservatives are forced to vote for funding for Planned Parenthood, I think there would have been a revolt in the House. And so I think the Speaker saw the handwriting on the wall. Unfortunately, this will probably allow him to go forward working with Democrats to get the votes needed to pass a CR that would continue funding for Planned Parenthood. Now, I've already been talking with other members of leadership. This is a critical issue, and if the Speaker wants to go to Democrats to get those votes, he can do that. But Republicans are going to have to draw the line on this issue and stand firm for life and getting taxpayers out of this forced partnership with Planned Parenthood, an organization that is trafficking in baby body parts. This is unacceptable and will not be tolerated.
And if CR is through December, do you see a government shutdown in December over this issue?
Well, that's up to the president. You know, if the president is so dedicated to Planned Parenthood and he wants to shut down the government, then I guess he needs to explain that to the American people.
Mr. Perkins, can you talk about the excuse me, press coverage of values voter, and in particular throwing around words like extremist and hate group and hate. And Mickey Addison kind of poked fun at that this morning, called herself part of an extremist white racist hate group because she's with the AFA. Can you elaborate on the terminology, especially in the left media?
Well, I can't because I haven't heard, because I don't listen to the left-wing media. And I'm not sure there's many Americans that do. Look, the left has an echo chamber in which they talk to themselves for those that they disagree with. Look, I think that, and I think you even saw that here, where among conservatives, as there were candidates that came that spoke disparagingly of other candidates, that was not well received here. The one time that Donald Trump was, he was kind of, I think, reprimanded by the crowd when he attacked Marco Rubio, or said Marco Rubio was a clown. You know, I think we expect civility. Look, this is a country in which we all have a right to participate in. We can have differing views, differing opinions, that's fine. But to label people, to marginalize them for the purpose of silencing them is inappropriate, it's unacceptable, and it should not be tolerated, and it should not be promoted by those in the media.
The RNC, after 2012, in their sort of autopsy of what went wrong that year, suggested that Republicans should put their focus on, you know, social issues and focus on things that can expand the tent. I guess what would be your response to that as we head into the next election?
Well, they did, and there was such blowback that they actually jettisoned that, and the RNC under Reince Priebus actually went out and hired a director for faith-based outreach. And so they have actually aggressively been working to reach into the faith community, working with churches, working with pastors and others to show that they do recognize the importance and want to work with that segment of the voting population, which is, as I said, very significant for Republicans in their primary and general election. So while that came out, what happened post that autopsy did not get a lot of attention, and that was that the RNC actually moved in the opposite direction of more aggressively working with social conservative voters.
Bob Jindal poked fun at Trump, kind of raising the idea that he's not a biblical man because his name's not in the Bible. Do you think Trump's a biblical man? Do you think he adheres to the Christian faith as much as the people who turn out against us?
I've not sat down with Donald Trump and talked about his personal faith. And when I look at this process, and you know, I've been now almost 2 decades in the political process, there are some people I agree with more closely than I do with others. Some based on our shared faith, others it's on the shared values that we have. And not everyone is going to have the same level of commitment to their Christian faith, or it may not be as central to their walk as it is with others. Some are still on that journey. I'm not going to criticize someone that's on that journey. I am going to talk to them about the issues and where we share those values, and I'm not going to shut the door on someone who has values that are similar to mine. And I'm going to continue to talk with them and work with them. And you know, I'm not at a point of making a decision who I'm going to support in the presidential race. I look forward to continuing the conversations with many of these candidates, and hopefully, as a result of this process, the candidate that we do rally around will be a stronger, better candidate that can become the next president of the United States.
And can you talk about Ted Cruz 3 in a row? Is that emblematic, you think, of him kind of being the king right now of social conservatives nationwide?
He embodies several aspects that I believe social conservatives are looking for, and conservative voters in general. I mean, you look at Donald Trump, Ben Carson, in the national polls, Carly Fiorina, who are doing well in general. For those that are taking a snapshot of where they see things right now and how they feel, there is total discontent with Washington, D.C. and the political class. That's reflected in that. Ted Cruz has been one that has taken on the political establishment. For those that are more engaged and more in the know, the influencers who know Ted Cruz know that. And I think that's reflective here. These are, the values voter summit is not just a snapshot, I think, of social conservatives across the country. It's social conservative influencers. These are people who take time, resources to come here that are more engaged. They go back home and they're influencers. So this is more reflective of what may be coming a few months down the road as opposed to where the general social conservative community is today. Any other questions?
You mentioned that sort of social conservative and religious voters make up a big portion of the Republican primary electorate, but it's a much smaller portion of the general election electorate, and we've seen Republican candidates sort of shift more to the middle to win the general. What would you counsel them who are thinking about that, and do you think they risk, I guess, losing the general if they do that?
Well, depending on the definition, you range anywhere from 24% to 33% of the general election will be made up of social conservative leaning, Republican leaning voters. So there's still a very significant portion, and that's been the challenge actually in the last two presidential elections, is that many of those voters stayed home because they did not identify with the candidate. Now, I completely disagree with that in terms of practice, and did all that I could personally in my capacity to support the last two candidates, especially Mitt Romney in 2012, because I knew after 4 years of Barack Obama what was at stake. I think we have to work very aggressively in the primary to get the candidate that we want, but in the end we got to vote for the candidate that in some cases may do the least amount of harm to the country. And I do think the Republican, hopefully we will have a conservative nominee for the Republican Party, which I think we will, because dynamics are a bit different this time. Last two elections you really only had one candidate driving kind of in the mainstream lane, and you had several conservative candidates, an establishment lane I should say. And this time you have multiple candidates in that establishment lane as well as the conservative lane. I think you have as good a chance of getting a conservative to get a consensus or plurality to move forward to get the nomination. And I think they will run as a conservative. Obviously, you've got to branch out and bring in more support, but you cannot forget the base, and that was what happened in 2012 as they stepped over the base in the general election, and that was unfortunate because it resulted in Barack Obama being reelected. So hopefully they've learned their lesson. Can't say that they have. History would suggest that they're very slow learners in the Republican Party.
If either Jeb Bush or Donald Trump were to win the Republican nomination, would you throw your full support behind either of them?
Well, we'll wait till we get there. I will say that, let me just speak to Donald Trump, the fact that he came here willing to have a conversation. I believe that there is a relationship to be built with Donald Trump and evangelicals. I'm concerned that Jeb Bush has sidestepped some of these events, and I think, look, social conservatives have been around. This movement is not new, nor is it dying, despite some press accounts. They've grown in their understanding of the political process, and they know that if candidates are not willing to come talk to them in an election, it's unlikely that they're willing to talk to them once in office. If they're not concerned about their issues when they're campaigning, they're not going to be concerned about their issues when they're governing. And so, my admonition to social conservatives, to those that care about this country, the heart and soul issues, they engage the candidates now. If the candidates do not want to talk about these issues now, don't expect them to talk about them when they're in office. It's much like, people think when they're dating, they're going to change their prospective spouse. That doesn't always work out. What you see is what you get. We mature, we change, but we need to look where the candidates stand today, and if they're afraid to talk about these issues now, chances are they'll be afraid to talk about the issues later. I want to thank you all for being here, and I do thank the press, both those that are conservative and not conservative, matters not. I just appreciate the fact that you're here to cover the Values Voter Summit, and we do appreciate you and hope that you have been treated well during the course of the weekend.